Hi Stampers, this is Debbie Henderson from Debbie's Designs. Welcome to a new project. Today I'm going to show you how to create a curvy bendy card. Curvy because of the way I curved this side of my layer. And this actually opens up. It has two tabs and you make slits on two of these so that they interlock with each other. So let's get started with a list of supplies you're going to need. I have 3 ink colors today: Melon Mambo, Smoky Slate, and Blushing Bride. For stamp sets, we're using the balloon builders that can be found in the Occasions 2016 catalog. I'm using the Happy Birthday, the balloon string, and the large balloon image. The balloon bouquet punch and the curvy corner trio punch is what I'm using for punches. You are going to need a small mat for cutting, an X-Acto knife, and I have some items that I pre-cut just to save time. Using the large balloon image, I stamped and cut 2 using Melon Mambo and Blushing Bride. You're also going to need stamping dimensionals and liquid glue. The little bow is cut using the bow from the Mini Treat Bag Thinlits die, and I cut just one using Bermuda Bay cardstock. For cardstock pieces, we're using 3 colors today: Whisper White, 3 3/4 by 5, and a small piece measuring 3/4 inches by 3 3/8. Crushed Curry, 3 pieces, 5 1/4 by 4, 1 by 3 5/8, and this is the curvy portion that I don't have measurements because I'm going to show you how to cut this. And Bermuda Bay, 5 1/2 by 8 1/2, scored in the center at 4 1/4, and a smaller piece, 1 1/4 by 5 1/4, and I have scored 1/2 inch on both sides. You're also going to need your usual bone folder, snail adhesive, and scissors. So let's get started. So we're going to start out with our Bermuda Bay cardstock base. And what I did, because this card is in the shape of a curvy, I thought maybe I should make a pattern so I'll have it on hand for next time. So I cut a piece of Whisper White the same size, 5 1/2 by 8 1/2. And all I did is used a pencil and just made my curvy shape the way I wanted and at the height that I wanted. And I cut that off. And then I cut a notch because this is what we're going to use. We're going to fold it over. And that's what's going to be used on the first bendy layer to notch that and make a slit. So now that I have my pattern all made, I'm just going to lay it on my Bermuda Bay card base, and I'm going to trace it. It just makes it a lot easier for future cards. So now I'm going to bring in my paper snips and just trim on the lines that I drew. And I'm trying to stay on the inside of my pencil mark so it won't show. So there's your curvy shape. Now I'm going to bring in my paper cutter and line this up at 4 1/4 and cut right on that score line for the top portion only. And then we're going to remove that. So this is what you should be left with after you've done your pattern. Now I'm just going to bring in my pencil just to make sure I got all of the pencil marks off. And we are now ready to assemble our card. So I'm going to bring in my curvy corner trio punch, and I'm using this one here that has the little scallops and looks like little eyelets, and I'm just going to do 2 corners. And I'm I'm also going to do the same thing on the Whisper White layer. This punch was actually available in the holiday catalog that just retired, and it's still available for purchase. It carried over. So now let's glue the crushed curvy layer. I'm just adding snail adhesive to all 4 sides. Oh, actually I forgot to punch these corners also. So I'm doing 3 layers with the corner punch. And it looks really neat when you layer each color on top of each other. Now, before we glue the white, we're going to actually do some stamping. So I'm going to bring in the Melon Mambo and the Blushing Bride ink. I'm also bringing in my Stampin' Pierce mat. It just gives it a little bit more cushion to push on, and the images come out really a lot better this way. So I'm going to start out with the balloon image, and I'm going to do 3 across. And using a scrap, I'm actually going to ink the stamp on the scrap, and then place a balloon. And you see how much lighter the ink comes out. So I'm going to do 4 balloons on this one. And I'm going to clean my stamp and then use the Blushing Bride. I'm going to do the same thing. Stamp full strength 3 times. And then stamp on my scrap and bring in the 4th row of balloons. So it kind of gives it an ombre effect. I really like the way that looks. Now I'm going to bring in the Smoky Slate ink, and I'm going to add strings to all of my balloons. I'll start on the bottom. I did forget to mention one other item I'm using for the string also. This was the silver cording that was available in the holiday catalog, which is no longer available. So if you don't have any of this, you can actually use a different color for your strings to match maybe like the linen thread or some of the baker's twine. Sorry about that. My son just called and I had to answer, of course. So I'm going to keep adding the strings to my balloons. And when I get to the 3rd row, I'm going to try not to overlap them. So I just move them over a little bit so you can still see. Didn't want it to look too busy by overlapping. So if you just move them over enough so they don't overlap each other. Okay, so there's all of my balloons with all of the strings. So now I'm going to put this aside for a minute. I did go ahead and cut 4 6-inch pieces of the silver cording trim. Going to bring in the balloons that I already stamped and cut with the punch. And I'm going to add a glue dot to the underside at the very bottom of the balloons. So there's 4 glue dots on 4 balloons. And then I'm going to add the string. This is just pretty much to help the string stay in place. So we're going to do 4 strings. And then we're going to add stamping dimensionals. I'm going to add 2 per balloon, 1 directly over the string and 1 a little higher. There's the last one. And now before I glue them in place, I hope I just added ink to this balloon, but we'll cover it up so it won't show anyway. I am going to bring in the Wink of Stella in gold. I did not mention that at the beginning. And I'm just going to add little swirls. And this really, really shines in real life. Probably can't see it well in the video, but there's the shimmer. There's a little bit of it. So I'm going to do that to all 4 balloons. There's 2. And like I said, don't pay attention to the ink that I just got on this balloon because we can fix that. I think what happened is I had some ink on my mat and that's where it transferred from. Okay, there's those. I'm also going to add some to my balloons that I stamped already. And this, if you can see, I just did it on these 3 at the top because the rest are going to be covered anyway. And the more layers you add of the Wink of Stella, the more it shows up. Okay, now let's glue the balloons in place. I'm going to add one here. What I did when I added these balloons, I added the lighter color over the dark and the darker color over the lighter color, so it shows up a lot better. This ribbon does curl. So you can see that I covered my boo-boo already. Okay, there's my 4 balloons. Now I'm going to add more glue dots way at the bottom here in the center. I'm just going to put 2. And because this string is so curly, that's what's going to hold it in place. So there's 2. And my 4th one. And now all I'm going to do is trim even with the bottom. And we're going to bring in, whoops, our little bow, and I'm going to add liquid glue to that. I'm just going to press that in place. And what I usually do is set it aside and I add a clear block on top for weight, just so it'll stay put. So while that dries, we'll move on to the 2 side pieces. Now the first thing we're going to do is the Bermuda Bay that we scored. We're going to fold both of them on the score lines. And because we have a notch on this side, we also need a notch on one side of this one. I'm just kind of freehanding this. I don't need to measure. Just cut off 2 little squares on each end. And then what we need to do, and I should have done this before I added my crushed curry, I'm going to add some liquid glue. And that slides right under, and it's going to be even with the side and bottom edge. So just press that in place. So there's your second part of your bendy card. Now we need to make our slits, and what actually happens is you end up with 3 layers of slits on this one. So I do my first slit, and then when I add my white, I cut it again, because 3 layers of cardstock to cut through is quite a task. So now I'm going to bring in my ruler and measure 1 inch from the score line. And I'm going to fold this over, and this is where I want to add my first line. So I'm going to draw a line the length of the tab. Okay. and bring in my ruler. And it's going to take a couple swipes to get this to go through. Now I'm going to erase my pencil mark and just flip it over and trace it again. And then we're just going to try it out to make sure that it slides in there. And it does. So all you need to do is poke that through and fold it over once it's back here. So that's my first line. On the second cut line, we're actually going to put it on the curvy side, and we're going to go in 1.5 inches. So just make a rough line there. And again, we're going to fold this over, place it right here, and draw the length of your tab. So there's my cut line for the second piece. Erase my pencil mark. And to make sure, now I'm going to make sure they both fit well together. So we'll put this one in place. And this one in place. And as you see, that works. There's your bendy part of your card. Now all we have left to do is to glue all our layers in. Now, one thing that I want to make sure to tell you is when you're gluing the yellow, the crushed curry part, you need to use liquid glue, because if you just use snail, once you start curving this, it's going to pop off. So we need to use liquid glue. So I'm going to bring in my Tombow. Whoops. See if I can spread some of that over. That's going to go on the front of your smaller flap. Next, we're going to add the sentiment. And what I did is use the happy birthday image using a blushing bride first. I stamped it in the center. And then I brought in the melon mambo and added the happy birthday on each side of the blushing bride. So that's what that looks like. And we're going to add quite a few dimensionals, because remember, this is going to bend and we don't want it to pop off. So I actually have, that one's not sticking. I actually have 6 dimensionals here. And that should keep it in place when you do the bending part of your card. So now let's glue that over the crushed curry layer, centered. So this side is all done, and as you can see, when I bend it, it's going to stay intact. Okay, now let's move on to this side. When I showed you at the beginning of the video this part, what I had done is used the pattern and I traced it and cut this portion. But we don't want it to be the exact same size. So we're going to bring in the paper cutter, and you're going to cut off 1/8 of an inch on each side. So it's just a little strip. And what I do is I put this on the cutting track, and I move this side over 1/8 of an inch. The reason you don't just cut off one side is because you want to maintain the curve. If you do it all on one side, it's going to be over too much on one side or the other. So by cutting 1/8 on each side, it keeps the same curvy aspect of your cardstock piece. On the bottom of it, you're going to cut off 3/8 of an inch. The reason I don't cut off 1/4 of an inch is when you trace on your cardstock, you're adding a little bit of measurement on both sides. So now this is going to fit perfectly on your cardstock piece. So again, we're going to glue this with liquid glue. left my cap off and it kind of glued itself. There we go. Now we're going to press this in place. And now that you've got this in place, we need to remember, trace the cut line so that it goes through to this one also. And now our last step is to glue our stamped layer. There is a lot of steps to this card, but it really is fun to create. And of course you can make it a little bit simpler than I did by not having so many layers also. But see how neat that looks when it's layered, all three of the same punch shape over each other. So there, now everything is glued together and in place. We need to do one more cut line, and that's the one over the white. And now let's see how everything will fit together. If you see that you have a hard time putting this through, just widen it out just a little bit. So there's your first one. And your second one. And the card is complete. So that's what it looks like when it's open. And that's what it looks like when all the pieces have been, the tabs have been put into place. Whoops, I didn't fold that one over. Make sure you don't make your cuts too loose too, so that they pop out. See, this one's popping out. I cut it a little bit too long, so I'm going to have to adjust that somehow. But this one here is nice and snug. Everything goes in perfectly and everything stays in place. Make sure you fold these over. And what I would do when I send this to the recipient is add a little note on how to assemble the card. So there you have it, a bendy card for today. I hope you give it a try. Most of the bendy cards that I've seen are in the landscape view, and actually this one is in the portrait mode. If you have any questions, leave me a message or contact me by email, and I will have a link to my online store and all of the supplies I used today. Have a good day.